Hello and welcome to the Digital Mythology Podcast. I'm your host, Declan Goodman. Today, we're going to be talking about AI, the ageism in tech, and the power of being the contrarian, the sage. I'm excited to be joined by guest Vito Forte from Perth, Western Australia today. Vito self-describes as a journeyman, someone who's been through a lot of tech over the years, quite a lot of hype cycles as well. And we're going to share today some of Vito's insights into how we can make more sense of this overall AI hype, and what does ageism sort of look and feel like in digital, and also how to be the one who applies judgment and applies some wisdom. So Vito, welcome. Delighted to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Declan. Great to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about a few things, but before we start, I'd like to just ask Vito if you don't mind giving a wee introduction to yourself and for our guests.
Okay. So you're correct in the journeyman tag, as you sort of indicated. Been in technology now for 43 years. It's been as of this year, and pretty much seen it all from early days of personal computing, mini computers, early days of networking, through to .com hysteria, to SaaS, cloud, and now I guess another hysteria called AI. So, it's been a long journey, and it's been interesting to see in that journey where technology really provided capability to industry and organizations and people, and where I guess, and part of the thing you want to talk about today, is where we're seeing it not really doing that now and becoming a tool of, for want of a better term, oligarchies to use against the very humans that it's meant to serve.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's happening a lot on LinkedIn as well. We're starting to see the hype become a little bit more apparent to people. They're beginning to question the value of it. And it's in the media as well. I think it's everywhere at the moment.
Yeah.
In usual digital mythology style, I was going to use ancient storytelling or ancient myths to help explain this. The three myths we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about Icarus, which is the Greek myth around flying too close to the sun or flying too close to the water. And we're going to be talking about King Solomon, and we're going to talk a wee bit about the Court Jester. So very excited to share these sort of ancient stories with our guests today to make more sense of this. And of course, we'll be using the three pillars of the digital mythology framework, which is Shin, which is heart mind, which is about an emotional drive. It's metaphor, how to use good metaphors to tell a story of digital, especially all this AI, to make sense of it. And Catalyst, which is a bit about motivating people. So really excited to get these insights. So Vito, maybe we start at the first one. So AI, it's a hype cycle, right? And like I mentioned, in Greek mythology, we had Daedalus and his son Icarus, and they were trapped at the tower. They both had to jump off the ledge and glide away from over Crete. And it was all fine, but Daedalus kept saying to his son, look, don't fly too high because you're going to get too close to the sun, and don't fly too low because moisture isn't good for wax. The myth goes that Icarus, got very excited, as people do with AI tools, and we're all very excited, and ignored the guardrails and of course went too close to the sun and then spiraled down. How does that feel in terms of a myth to use to explain this, Vito? And in your experience, how does that resonate with what you think is happening in AI?
It sort of parallels, I guess, what's happening at the moment. I guess the difference to a certain extent is those guardrails haven't really been defined. And they haven't been defined because the people that are driving the creation and adoption have self-interest, right? Their self-interest is to get more adoption than the next organization or tech company, whatever you want to call them, in order to drive investment, capital, and things like that, right? And as we've seen over the past, it's probably now 3 years at least, when ChatGPT first came out, there's been a lot of promises made in terms of where we were going to be within a year, and then where we were going to be within 2 years. And I think even when ChatGPT first came out, I think there was all this talk about AGI being out within the next 2 years. And I think one of the interesting, I guess myths, we talk about myths in this podcast, but one of the interesting myths there is just a basic understanding of what large language models are. They are fundamentally a probabilistic algorithm that just picks the next word, not based on it thinks or conscience or sentience and
Mm.
all of this paraphernalia that gets spread by the AI companies, because they're trying to humanize what is fundamentally inhuman in order to drive adoption, which then drives revenue, which then drives investment, right? So I think
Mm.
understanding the motivations is important, as we are seeing those promises or the predictions that were made several years ago are sort of not becoming true. There's been a lot of talk of, especially recently, of AI slop, and we're seeing that everywhere.
Yeah.
I think there was a comment, I think you raised it around, if like on LinkedIn, and it's probably worse on other platforms, if an author just publishes AI generated content, is it actually appropriate? Does it have an author? And my answer is no, because they're
Mm.
not the author. A machine is an author, and it's just chosen a bunch of words that sound really good. But if you really dig into it, does it really make sense? Does it have the human context associated with it? And we're starting to see, reports of OpenAI and their capital expenditures with very little revenue. They're masking Microsoft, and it's obviously very visible failure with Copilot. I think their market cap dropped by $1 trillion, right? I mean, it's astounding the amount of money that seems to have been lost, yet it doesn't seem to matter. Now, you think of that volume of cash and what it would actually do to the world, right? I think there was an estimate once that said total world poverty could be eradicated with, I think it was 10 or 100 billion, one of those, pick one. But that's still
Yeah.
much less than $1 trillion that just
Yeah.
disappeared in the space of a week. So I fundamentally see there's a number of organizations that their wax is melting. It's melting very quickly,
Mm.
yet they're trying to, let's say, clutch the feathers together and flap like crazy to see if they can survive.
Flap like crazy. And it's funny
Yeah.
that, isn't it? Because that's why I like using that myth, because there's this kind of element where I like it a bit further than just the fact that there should be more clear guardrails, but it's
Mm.
also the fact that it was an escape, because I think people feel the urge, and organizations and leaders feel the urge to get off that ledge and jump into the AI cycle.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
don't, then what are you doing? You're not a progressive leader. But if you do,
That's
how far do
exactly
you
right.
go with it?
Yeah.
And it's
And
kind
I
of,
think that was another
you know,
point that was raised by someone, I think, talking about, and you see it everywhere. Everybody wants to be an AI first organization. And when I put my large decades experience hat on, never in the past has any organization said that they want to be tagged with a technology first mantra, right? They're customer first. They want to be within their industry, because the technology has always been the supporting infrastructure, the nervous system of the organization in order to deliver whatever its outcomes are.
mm,
Saying you're AI first is putting the tool ahead of everything else. And why would you do that? How does that make any sense? You might as well say, I'm Excel first, or I'm
yeah,
database first, or pick an application and I'm that first, because that's what it means. I mean, as a customer or as a lay person, you're going to look at that and go, doesn't make any sense to me, because my customer service capability is still terrible. I can't access the things that I need to access because that's still terrible, because now I've got to deal with a chatbot that just, and I've got great examples where banks and others have done it, and they spray all of these options on in a chat window on a phone that goes past the bottom, and you got to scroll around and you go, it's too hard, right? So what is it serving? Is it serving you that's giving them money, or is it serving them by some way that they've got some weird internal metric that says it's all great because everybody's using it? Well, that's because we don't have a choice.
that's right. We don't have a choice. And it's
No.
also, we've been through these cycles before. I mean,
Yeah.
not quite like this one, but I have this feeling that this one is a wee bit different than the rest,
Yeah.
because it's sort of like, it's very seductive, like it's
Hmm.
very, like before we had cloud, and then we had maybe virtualization, and then mobility, and all of these new, and
Hmm.
customer personalization and all this stuff. But now we have this companionship that people are experiencing on a one-on-one with their AIs talking to them on the daily. And, well, I can use the word companionship with inverted commas, but my point is there's an immediate deceiving factor, I guess I feel, is that it just feels like a human. So it's very easy to assume that AI will have the same analytic or problem solving or predictive skills as a human. And I know only recently, it came out only a few days ago, I think Microsoft said most of us with white collars are going to be out of work within 18 months or 2 years and stuff. And you're thinking,
yeah, I did laugh at that, by the way. It's not. It's nonsensical. It's again marketing ahead of any substance, right? Because they, as I've said, they've lost $1 trillion in market value. How they're going to try and get that back, whether they need it or not, is a different discussion. And that's by trying to say, I guess, things like that sound remarkable, because they're not, don't forget, they're saying that not to people like us. They're saying it to CEOs and executives who just see people as a cost that needs to be reduced, right? Anything they can do to reduce that cost just means that their margin and whatever other revenue they're looking at will be greater. They're ignoring whether it's good, bad, will actually get them any more customers or not, or whatever, right? That doesn't even come into this frame of mind. So I think once you put that lens on this sort of talk, you get to understand what it's really about, and it isn't about improvement to society or anything like that. It's fundamentally about money, and that's it.
The next topic I wanted to talk to you about around ageism. In terms of mythology, the thing I'm trying to refer back to, it's not quite mythology, but it's King Solomon and this biblical character about when great creator said to him, I can give you anything you want. What do you want? Do you want power or do you want wisdom? He chose wisdom. He chose the ability to judge more wisely, because King Solomon seeing that, been able to, the long game, the strategic game. And of course he went on and he wanted to build an entire temple and build an empire. And he knew to do that, he could only do it with wisdom. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, as someone who is in their twilight years, I guess I can say, but it's been,
in tech terms,
in tech terms. Well, yeah, it's been prevalent for a while, and it's actually gotten worse. And I think it's related to the fact that, coming back to your point about wisdom, people perceive your ability to discern, let's say, false idols, right, as a negative, right? And, vendors now have substantially more power than they used to have. They have an ability to directly influence very senior people in organizations with promises of magical ROI and productivity gains, and you name it. I've heard it all before, right? And they get them to sign up to all sorts of stuff. But when it doesn't get delivered, it falls on the relevant department to deal with it. But no one's necessarily held accountable. There's no view that says, well, hang on, you promised X, Y, and Z. Why didn't we get it? And it turns into this, let's sort of bury it. Let's not talk about it. It's sort of good enough, and let's just move on, right? If you put the AI piece on this as well, the challenge with that is that, how are you approaching what you want to do with AI? Is it just from, again, I just need to put AI in because everyone else is doing it, without actually understanding, is it actually going to help your business? Is it relevant to your business? Is it relevant to your customers? Is it relevant to your staff? Why are you doing it? And it's always needs to come from that perspective of why, right? This is how you get people to engage. This is how you get people to buy into whatever it is it may be. It's not by just pronouncing from up top, we will now do this, and just people go, well, do we need to do that? Is that money better spent there, or should it be spent on the actual systems that we currently have that have never been updated for the last 15 years, which, by the way, has all the data that the AI systems use, but it's all garbage because no one's maintained it. So you end up in a situation where they'll put in the shiny object. Shiny object doesn't work. It'll be somebody else's fault. And then the organization just goes back to doing what they did before the shiny object appeared. And then that gets buried in several $1 million later. They'll start again. And that pattern repeats often, right? in many organizations because there isn't the right conversation. And I'm a big fan of you want to really prove it 2 or 3 times before you change something, right? There are instances where those changes need to be done and there's good reasons to do it. But prior to AI, all of those transformations were additive to an organization and to its people. The AI stuff isn't. Tends to be negative. It's negative to the staff. It's negative to, because if it's not negative to staff, it doesn't return. There's no return. There's barely any return now. So the only return they can deliver is by saying, well, we're going to replace X number of people in whichever department and replace it with agents or whatever the case may be. And then
Yeah.
you've got a set of things, and I'll use that term, running that don't, and this is the other thing, people underestimate the level of complexity in many organizations' processes, right? And think that the complexity is there because people don't know what they're doing. The complexity is there because the organization doesn't know what it's doing and hasn't chosen to fix it. Yeah. So there's all of these layers that seem to get forgotten about when, especially when the AI stuff starts to appear on boardrooms and all the rest of it. And instead of taking an approach to say, you as the people that do this day to day, if you had a tool that could help you deliver this quicker, or you could do this job better or whatever, what would that look like? That's where you start. And you get them to do it and you get them to prove it. Because if they don't do it and they don't prove it, they will never buy into it. And you will have a nice shiny set of stuff that no one uses. And adoption is one of the key metrics of any technology capability. If there's no adoption, I'll go back to Microsoft, right? What happens?
Yeah, and look, that's the kind of King Solomon aspect of it, isn't it? It's having that wisdom to know that if you've been through this a number of times, remember, like, there's a lot of expectation nowadays. I mean, every tech conference there is, they're talking about AI and how important it is to get on board. But that's a bit of pressure for, leaders today to say, look, I can't not do AI. I have to do something. When they look for what should I focus on, or what at least should my strategy, what are the maturity capabilities I need to build first? I think you get a lot of that benefit from people with experience,
But you mentioned strategy, Declan. You mentioned strategy, right? This is one of my pet peeves, right? And for many years, my view was always that a technology strategy is aligned with a organizational business strategy. It's not independent of it, right? So if we're now going down the realm of creating an independent technology strategy because it's got AI, the two letters of AI in it, how does that make any sense? So if your organization is about selling services, right, you're only going to get revenue by selling more services, and those services are of an appropriate quality that people want to pay for them, right? Yeah, that's where you start. Now, whether the AI helps or doesn't help that's part of that journey. It's not from, we're just going to do AI and then work backwards and make and hope that we get quality and capability and all the rest of it. It's the wrong way around. And this is because the people that are selling it that way, because they're not accountable for it not working. You are. They're going to say, we only provide the pipes and plumbing because it doesn't work because you're not making it work, and they walk away with their millions of dollars.
There's not much point in writing a strategy about an enabler. The strategy should be, what does the business need, and how is it going to help us be more successful as an organization, or what are the customers doing? What way are we heading with our market industry?
And I was always a big fan of one page, strategy on a page, right? It needs to be articulated in a manner that's understood, and buy-in actually happens from the people that are meant to deliver it. And that's how you measure its success or failure, right? If you don't, you can write a 60-page document, right? But then that's not a strategy, right? That's either some sort of project definition or some other thing, right? And this is where we get caught up. And if you end up with, as you indicated there, 5, 6, 8, 10 different strategies, who's going to make sense of that? And who's going to care?
Yeah. Well, and also what'll happen, Vito, is they'll just give it the Copilot to summarize into a top.
Well, exactly. So what you'll end up with is a strategy that's been formulated by an AI that looks very professional, has all the fancy buzzwords in it, so you can tick all your buzzword bingo boxes, but actually is nonsensical and doesn't really mean anything, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the other danger here. And it's becoming prevalent in organizations that are using these tools in that way. And the challenge with that for most people is it removes that thinking. You raised that earlier. You're thinking about, so if you're accountable for delivering something, you've got to think about how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
How do you convince people to do it? And then how do you make sure that it continues to work appropriately? If you take those people out of that loop, who's going to do any of that? The
That's right.
AI,
That's right.
right? So what are you going to see? You're going to see a nice looking fancy document with charts and verbiage, but a wasteland of delivery.
Yeah. So this is really nice. Lead us into the next topic, and that one was really about being being brave enough, I guess, and having the leaders and organizations having the space really to be able to challenge
Yeah.
what's going on. And again, a nice archetype I like to use is the court jester. So back in the medieval times, the only role that could challenge the king or the queen and like make fun of what's been proposed because it's so preposterous was the court jester. So they were allowed, in fact, in other philosophies, the court jester, different names, they're kind of often referred to as the fool, but not in the fool and being ignorant, but they play the fool because they can see that the whole thing is just a hype. It's a game and they see through it, right? So that's what I like about this one is the third topic for today, and it's really around that catalyst side of the pillars is how do we give people and empower people to be the court jester, right? As in to be the one to say, well, hang on, we can do all of this AI stuff, but we need to maybe look at the bigger picture and say, maybe challenge it. Like I sometimes think it's almost taboo these days if you start challenging adoption of AI because everybody else is doing it. I think now more than ever, we need that court jester type archetype to just be the contrarian and say, and that's what ties in well with the people who've been in the industry for long enough to know, because that's often another aspect that the court jester was. They were quite sage-like, they were wise, they'd been through many experiences with the court, and so they were the ones that they had the sort of the currency, really, the knowledge to challenge the powers that be on it. And I'm just wondering, does that is that kind of what you're tending towards when it comes to this, been courageous and just questioning what are we
Well,
really doing here?
yeah.
Do we need to do
Well,
it?
courage and bravery is required. The other point in this is trust, right? So you need trust between the leadership and the relevant parties involved in developing any of this, right? And it's one of those things, you've probably heard it before, and I hear it all the time. And I think there was another post a while back where someone talked about AI should be led by IT and not the business, and so whoa, stop. So my and I always pick people when I hear that kind of stuff. I said, so but IT is part of the same organisation that finance is. Do you say that it's the business and finance? Do you say it's the business and HR? You don't. So why is IT singled out as being different and requires that extra level of fundamentally? It's a complex discipline. It's become more complex over the years. It's critical to an organization's overall capability and success. So it tends to attract that. But the fundamental part in terms of being successful, whether you want to challenge the status quo, is a level of trust within leadership that
Right.
allows you to do that, right? If that doesn't exist, and this links back to the previous part that we talked about around wisdom, right? Because generally what happens is that contrarian attitude comes with experience and wisdom, which generally means older, which then generally means, are you still actually there? So you tend to have the situation in many organizations now where people in particular leadership positions don't have that perspective because they've never been through that perspective. And by the time you do have the perspective, you're sort of no longer wanted, right? You're sort of surplus to requirements. So it's getting worse. So that spiral is getting worse at the moment. If I look back at my experience, there were probably 4 organisations where that trust existed, and we were very successful in terms of making sure that we got those capabilities and transformations done in a manner that delivered real value. And there are other organizations where, let's say that wasn't there, and then they were prone to substantial failure. So you end up having to survey the organizational politics, because that will drive everything. You can be the court jester all you like, but if the organization is not one that actually respects that opinion, you're wasting your time. And I know it sounds fatalistic, but it fundamentally is, right? And they will search for an opinion and advice that matches their particular view, and will not accept any other advice or view. So that's the other part. You can sit there banging on about it, but you will find that in those organizations, it won't make a difference. And you need to make a choice. Do you want to stay, or do you want to go and take your skills elsewhere?
In terms of summarizing this overall space, then when we talk about AI and what it means, we have Icarus, the Icarus myth, which is there are loosely defined guardrails, but before you jump off the ledge, or you may already have jumped off, just keep an eye on being too ambitious, going too far, or being, I guess, too not knowing where you should be heading, which could bring you too low, and it could be a bit of a major failure. So the answer to that, I guess, is, just try to be a little bit guarded there and use some reasonably good thinking ahead into where you want to end up. The next one was the King Solomon. So that's really about the wisdom piece, which is just about, rather than quick fixes, think a little bit longer term into building foundational AI, adopting it, as you mentioned, in an adaptive way, because adoption's key. So have a few small pilots maybe and go slow. And then the third one is the Court Jester. That's really just about searching out the truth, really challenging at least, yes, there's a lot of hype, and yes, there's things moving, but is it right for our organization? And does it make sense at the moment? Should we be a leader with AI in this, or should we be a follower? Sometimes it can make sense to be a follower if it's not really part of your core business. They're the three kind of areas I wanted to call out with you, Vito. Very well articulated. In terms of getting some takeaways before we wrap up for our audience, we have the, Shin, heart, mind is about finding the why and making sure that within your guardrails, it makes sense to play an AI space there. The metaphor pieces around Solomon, and we all know how wise he was, but also bringing in the, ageism aspect. There can be a lot of value there. And then lastly is really around the jester, as we mentioned, the catalyst. That's empowering people to ask the right kind of questions to challenge whether or not AI makes sense. Have you any other takeaways you'd like to share with our audience today?
Well, fundamentally, and I've always worked from the premise that says you always put yourself in your customer's shoes, right? So whether it's, your customer is an internal customer, whether your customer is an external customer, are you public facing, are you not, whatever the case may be, one of the key, I guess, failures I see and have seen over the years is where people do not do that and deploy technology based on their own perspective, which destroys customer value, right? And, most organizations are out there because they deliver something to customers. Well, what is that? And how can that be enhanced or improved by any deployment of any technology? I mean, at the moment, all the hype's around AI, but you only have to go back a few years where, a bad app can bring down an organization, right? And those sorts of things. Yeah. So it's not it shouldn't be a difficult thing to do, but many technology people seem to have an innate ability to think that they're better than their customers and forget who pays their salary. So, I think that's one of the key takeaways that I would indicate. And, having been in education institutions, mining institutions, engineering, shipping, all this sort of stuff, various assortment of different customers. One thing I can say is that they are fundamentally all the same. They don't want to be hassled. They want their job to be easy, and they just need to get their stuff done so they can go home. So it's pretty much there, right? And if you cover all of those bases, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, look, that is the key though, isn't it? It's like a technology should be there to make business and customer experiences easier.
It should be invisible, right? And, people talk about Apple and this sort of stuff, right? And, simplicity is hard to do, right? So people find it difficult and choose complexity, right? And sometimes it's chosen because it makes people feel like, see, I know what I'm doing because look how complex this thing is, right? Does it
Yeah.
need to be complex, right?
Yeah.
And who are you trying to convince, right? So I think using those particular perspectives is important and
Mm.
will make whatever it is that you're doing much more
Mm.
adoptable and usable. And that's how you spread the word on whatever it is that you're doing rather than falling into the trap of making something complex because it looks good or feels good to someone internally, which is completely irrelevant to the people that actually have to use it. And I
Well,
would suggest that many organizations, if they're smart and they have their really good marketing people, will start to look at their competitors who are busily saying that they're AI first, and they will choose a different mantra. So, if you're a
mm,
university student and you need to choose a university, do you want to go to the one that says they are AI first, or the one that says that they are student first, or they are job first, or they're professional
mm,
first? Which one would you choose, right? So
mm,
I think
mm,
that's part of that thought process, right? Because saying
mm,
AI first means nothing to most people,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
Apart from
Yeah.
certain leadership and if any organization says that, as I said before, it is not directed to their staff or customers, it's directed to their investors. And that's basically all it's about. Yeah. So just another point, which generally isn't just about AI or technology, but fundamentally life in general. And life is about contrast, right? If you don't have struggle and low points, the high points mean nothing, right? So you talk about people coming into tech now. Now, if all they've ever learned is to prompt engineer an outcome, how do they know that outcome is actually the best outcome? So where do they apply those critical thinking skills? How do they
Mm,
know that actually what
mm,
I'm generating, and I've got a good example, I'll use my son who's in cyber and he's been using one of the big LLMs to help him do code and that. And he's been doing that
mhm.
for probably at least 12 months now. And the other day, he just said to me off the cuff, he said, I'm going to stop using it now because what I've realized is that it just generates code that's overly complex, very repetitive, and just requires me to spend so much more time dealing with it than me just doing it myself, which is becoming very prevalent in many areas as
Well,
well. Now, the AI companies don't want to hear that. But again, if we go back to what actually an LLM is, that is not a surprise. And this is the challenge for newcomers, right? When I was a newcomer, there was none of this stuff. You had to learn and you learnt by making mistakes, right? How do you do that when
yeah.
you've got these abstraction layers between you and I'll say reality that mask a lot of this? Yeah. And then it becomes your problem to try and decipher what's being created. And this is where there's probably not as much discussion about because in 10 years' time, we're all gone and we're not in the industry and we're not there saying, yeah, that doesn't look right. Who's going to say that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Who's going to be the jester or the stage to say this doesn't make sense?
That's if you've still got a job, right? Because based on the predictions of many of these organizations, all the white collar people are gone. So there's no one left. No one's going to be able to do it, right? And
Yeah.
don't know about you, but I really don't want to live in that kind of world.
No, no, I tell you one thing, it's going to be a very interesting world. I think about people who are in college now or high school looking to go in. It's going to be very interesting what they're growing, the kind of world they're growing into. You can't put an old person's head on a young person's shoulder. So, often you have a push, a drive, and then afterwards in hindsight, yeah, it wasn't the best. But the key takeaways would be go ahead and move with the tide that's coming, which is AI, because you have to remain competitive, but do it with a kind of a sprinkle of sensible judgment and bring in those people more mature in their career or look for some advisory assistance from people in your network who've been through one or two hype cycles, because I think that's what will really bring that human led decision making to the table, which will help. Vito, really lovely chatting to you. Before we finish up, I just wondered on a personal level, you're based out in Perth, WA, have you any hobbies? Do you like surfing or something, or what is it you do? to come down off this?
I've recently taken up swimming because my wife did a lot of swimming, and I've chosen to take that up to honour her achievements. And she managed to do a solo crossing to Rottnest Island here, which is a
Oh,
20
wow.
kilometre open ocean swim, and she did that in 2019. So
Wow.
it's hard work. I knew what she did was absolutely outstanding, but now I know it's even more than that, and respect to her for that. Well, apart
Wow.
from that, do just general stuff. There's nothing too exciting. I'm a pretty boring sort of
Yeah.
person, and like my sci-fi and various other bits and pieces. But
Yeah.
I'm looking at trying to help others where I can and finding purposeful activities, and that journey continues. So definitely not the AI space. That to me at the moment is not purposeful. It's just a rabbit warren of deceit and dehumanization. Let me say that. And I know that sounds very negative, but it's becoming worse from that perspective. Yeah. But yeah, no, apart from that, yeah, that's basically it for me.
Fantastic. Well, look, thanks again for being such a great guest. Lovely chatting to you. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, a veil of your Court Jester or of your King Solomon or maybe some
Yeah,
Icarus,
just search grumpy old man.
grumpy old journeyman. Let's keep the journeyman in there.
Grumpy old journeyman. Yeah, that's right.
They can find you on LinkedIn and connect
Yeah.
and go from there. Fantastic. Well, thanks again for your time. It's been a great session.
Second. Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you.